When you talk about design thinking, okay, so either people think that it's too abstract or it is something which is related to design. But exactly what it is, can you describe in simple terms?
Well, if you want to build the next big Facebook or you want to build the next big Zomato, you need to understand what is it that really appeals to the.
Is it something which is relevant only to product design or it could be applied in any scenario?
You could find frictions in your day-to-day life. For example, standing in queues in banks would be a problem, and that's a human problem.
So, if we think about design thinking as a process, what could be the steps of the process?
So it's a five-step process. It's empathy is really hard to say. It's so easy to say you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes. For a lot of the product companies, what we say is work on the friction areas, not on the touch points which are already working well.
Now, the third stage, ideate. How does ideate work and what role does it play in the entire process?
Well, like design thinking is understood as something like a fast food that you just fix it and just try it out for like a one day or just get trained and try to apply some of it. If it works, fine, or just.
Good morning, good evening. Welcome to a brand new episode of Future Forward, a podcast series by Techcanvass on artificial intelligence, business analysis, and data analytics. Every week, we invite an industry expert to talk about a subject at length. Now, before I begin the episode for today, let me tell you a very quick case study. So, it is year 2009. I'm going to talk about a hospitality company. This was going through a really bad phase and it was on the verge of getting shut down. So, at that point in time, the founders decided to do something completely unique. They went to the hosts, they talked to the customers, the clients who were going to book the places of the hosts. Now, what happened with these discussions is that they got to know some very simple yet very, very powerful insights. One of them was that the low quality photos were not able to convey the real stay experience at the host place. So they replaced these poor quality photos with professionally shot photographs. And also, they added a feature in the portal where the host can communicate directly with the guests, bringing in more transparency in the overall transaction. So, design thinking actually keeps people at the center of how we make decisions. Today, we are going to talk about design thinking. In this example, which I just shared, what is unique is that the founders did not hire an expensive management consultant. Rather, they went to the people or the stakeholders who are at the center of the business. And that's how they got the insights which turned around the entire company. And now that company is one of the most iconic and most successful hospitality companies. This company is Airbnb. So today's episode is about design thinking. We'll talk about what is design thinking, how is it relevant, what are its elements, and what does it involve if we want to bring in design thinking into our initiatives. To talk about that, we have Prashant Tavalam. He's a business transformation coach and product strategy leader who has driven innovation at global brands like Visa, Rakuten, and Dell. He has built 14 plus products using design thinking, AI, and UX, while mentoring 1,000 plus product managers and business analysts. A TEDx speaker and coach, he champions modern frameworks like OKRs and Agile to create real business impact. Welcome to the show, Prashant.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's start with talking about your professional career. If you can start with that.
See, my career basically started off working with, soon after I graduated, I worked for about 3 years in the auto industry, mostly on the supply chain side, dealer development side, where I got exposed to the supply chain way of doing things, the business. Post that, it's mostly been consulting, a lot of IT consulting and customer facing. And I was able to appreciate the customer problems from the very beginning of my career. And because you understand customer problems, you know how the end solution looks like and how customers finally experience the solution. So my journey started in the IT consulting as a business analyst, then went on to become a product manager. And I've been coaching and training. That's also my passion. So in this space, so about 12, 13 years ago, I got exposed to design areas, and since then, it's been a wonderful journey in that space. So that's how the journey has been so far.
Okay. So you mentioned about that 12, 13 years ago, you got introduced to design thinking. So just before we start discussion, what did you find interesting about the design thinking?
Well, I found it a lot more lively, and I could see a lot of colors and a lot of fun way of doing things. Right, that's what got me interested, and I chanced upon design thinking jam where a lot of designers come together and kind of identify society problems and kind of solve it creatively. And that's what accidentally, it was a by chance occasion where I actually got into this kind of jam where you're solving problems, and it was really fun the way designers do it. And I was like, hey, this is too exciting. And then I started to notice the same kind of approaches in the day-to-day work, or how I can implement it, and how it's already been done in some successful companies. And since then, it's a wonderful journey.
Great. So when you talk about design thinking, okay, so either people think that it's too abstract
Hmm.
or it is something which is related to design.
Yes.
Okay. But exactly what it is, can you describe in simple terms?
So I will say it's a classic problem solving process. It's very creative in nature, and it has a lot of human value. You bring in a lot of soft skills into the picture, and especially if you're in a technical or a kind of a industry where this things get very technical, this kind of design thinking balances out the friction and much needed help from a human centric point of view, because at the end of the day, humans use the products or solutions, and you need to have human values to understand humans. And design thinking brings those human values to the table. So, as humans, fellow humans, you need to understand humans, and that's where the empathy part of design thinking comes in. So, empathy is hard, you have to practice it, and it takes a lot of effort. It has a bit of a structure that has to come into place. So these are things, being in the problem space takes time. So design thinking does a good job of trying to bring balance to the whole process and business, right? So,
Okay. So why design thinking you think is important in these times?
well, if you want to build the next big Facebook, or you want to build the next big Zomato, you need to understand what is it that really appeals to the users. What are the real problems? Are they really the problems? And how much time are you actually spending to understand customer problems? Because things move so fast, nobody really has the time to pause and understand users in detail. Design thinking gives you that opportunity to pause and spend more time in the problem space. So it's going to be relevant even in the industries or in the products that come into the future, because you're investing billions of dollars. You don't want to do it on whims and fancies. You don't want to just rely on data, which is the quantitative part. You also want a qualitative angle to making business decisions, and design thinking helps you do that.
Okay. Can you share a few examples where design thinking actually helped? So Airbnb, one case which I discussed. Any other real life examples you can share?
So well, there are a lot of US based companies which do that. A lot of, like, for example, Slack. Slack does that. It's a product led company. So most of the companies where there's no sales centric approach, there's a product centric approach, uses design thinking. So Slack is a good example of how it started off as an internal product, and then they slowly figured out that they can actually make it into a wonderful product and sell it to organizations or people outside. So that was a good revelation, and how they spent more time understanding for say for their internal users first, and then they thought it's a brilliant idea and it solves a bigger problem of the industry. That's how Slack became very popular and successful.
Okay. So, is it something which is relevant only to product design, or it could be applied in any scenario?
It can be applied to any area of life, even to your personal life, professional, and it's not fixated on just product centric business.
Okay. Okay. Any other example if you can share, not necessarily in the IT space, anything anywhere when you see design thinking is has been applied.
So a lot of services also. You can also imagine how, for example, you could find frictions in your day-to-day life. For example, standing in queues in banks could be a problem, and that's a human problem. So there's a lot of automation that's bought in. Now you will see that the number of times you actually have to go to the bank has reduced, because people are trying to reduce the friction by bringing in meaningful solutions, right? Which solves a problem, which means you don't really have to go to the bank to do all your transactions. So that's a good example of how we experience good design on a day-to-day basis. So we have chatbots, which is kind of customized to our quick needs. If you have some low intensity issues or low priority issues, that can be handled by your regular chatbots. You don't really have to go to the bank to do that. So that's a good example of how you use design to do meaningful work and reduce friction in the user journey.
Okay. So just taking this ahead. So if we think about design thinking as a process, what could be the steps of the process?
So it's a five-step process. It's empathize, and where you empathize with the users or the people who are going to use your solution, or the people who are facing the problem. And then you have the define stage. Define stage is where you actually define the problem, which is the hardest part of what problem you want to solve. Because if you understand the problem clearly, is where 50% of the solution is done, right? So the define happens there. Then you have the ideate part, which is a favorite part for most of us, because we have brilliant ideas, especially in the IT industry. You'll see people have ready made solutions. So, ideate is that step where you kind of understand what kind of solutions can we use to solve this particular problem. Um, then comes the prototype part, where you kind of build a prototype, a proof of concept, or something that's touch and feel, or a way to experience the solution. And that's where you also tend to collect feedback on whether the product is good, bad, or it can be improved. So that's the prototype stage where you build it. And the testing is the continuous process of improving, getting customer feedback. So these are five classic stages in design thinking process.
Okay. So let's discuss more about each of the stages. So start with the empathize. Okay. So how do you really empathize with the customers or the users? How do you really do that?
Well, empathy is really hard to say. It's so easy to say you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, because as a habit, it's very difficult to take time, pause, and really understand what's going on with the other person. You have specialists like the psychologists, or you have some UX researchers do that. But for a person from a day to day life to actually put themselves in another person's shoes is hard. Those are skills you need to pick up over a period of time. So, empathy is through observation. Empathy can happen by having conversations, and it has to be open ended conversations, not closed ended. So those kind of sets you out into a different journey, where you kind of understand the user journey better, you understand their problems or friction areas better. So empathy also has certain frameworks or tools that you can use. A classic example is an empathy map canvas. That's a great way to get somebody started, and somebody to have some structure in empathizing with the user. So empathy map canvas is something to start. using if you want to learn empathy.
So actually, that was my next question. That these frameworks, are there some frameworks to kind of better understand the customer or the users? So you talked about empathy map. So what is it? Is customer journey map also something for empathizing, or this is a different tool?
So it's another level of empathizing. You have multiple ways to empathize. Empathy Map Canvas does a complete job of understanding a human emotion when encountering a certain problem or friction in a particular scenario. For example, if I have to go to the bank and I experience friction, that's a great scenario to empathize with. A person going to the bank to kind of carry out some transactions is a scenario or a use case to work with. So having to spend time to understand. So there are 7 or 8 stages to empathy map canvas, which is uh, who is the user, whom are we empathizing with, what is the role of the user. Is it a common man wanting to do a bank transaction, or is it an auto rickshaw driver who is out in the sun, trying to make a living, or is it a doctor who's caring for the patients? So this way, firstly, you need to understand their persona. Then you need to second is you need to understand their user goals. Like, what are they trying to achieve at the end of the day? Because they do a lot of things. At the end of the day, what does success mean to them? So that's goals. And then you get to what are they feeling when going through the process? Are they frustrated? Are they anxious? Are they happy? How are they feeling? And only by having an intentional way of observing people and users in that scenario will you actually understand what's really going on with them. So that's real empathy happening. And until unless you do it in a sincere way, you cannot fill up the empathy map canvas. So that is feeling. And then what are they seeing in that particular scenario? As an auto rickshaw driver, what am I seeing? I'm seeing a lot of traffic. I see people, shouting. I see my fellow auto rickshaw drivers, policemen, a lot of people moving around. This is what I see. Can you empathize with an auto rickshaw driver? So that is what is seeing. Then what do they what next one is hearing. What do they hear? Loud sounds, people shouting, people bargaining, policemen also honk, the vehicles honking. This is what they hear. So this kind of gives you a broader understanding of how it is to be an auto rickshaw driver, how it is to be a doctor. So you kind of get into their skin. It's like a cameraman following the main character in the movie, just moving with them, experiencing all the emotions, intense emotions that they're experiencing. So it's all how you filter all that and put it in an empathy map canvas. So that's where a hearing happens. What do they see? What do they hear? What do they feel? What do they say when they're encountering in that situation? Oh, I'm frustrated. Oh, this is not going to work. Oh, it's taking too much time. So what are they saying? Literally, what are they saying? So what you're doing here is faithfully and without any judgment or bias, trying to consume the whole experience of the user. Only then you understand what is real friction in that whole process. So empathy is very intentional, very a process which is done with sincerity, without any bias or judgment, and it comes with practice. So once you do and understand them in terms of feeling all these different human emotions, is when you really understand the empathy map canvas. And also there is pains and gains. Just like you have value propositions, what really frustrates them? What are the pain areas? And what are the gain areas? What are their motivations? Like for example, for a student, getting high marks, getting a job is a motivation or gain. What is a pain is because they have to do too many things. Time management is an issue, stress is an issue, peer pressure is an issue. So these are pain areas. So this way, having to understand a user in a particular scenario in a well-rounded fashion happens with the empathy map canvas. So that's a beautiful journey. If somebody has to try out empathy map canvas, you feel so grounded, you understand the user better. And imagine having to do this many times over. That's when you get an expert and understanding humans and human emotions during the process.
Yeah.
That's empathy map canvas.
So that's a pretty nice way of structuring how to do empathize with people, right? So you talked about friction, you talked about the personas. So these tools and framework, the empathy map like framework, can be used to actually do something concrete and structured as far as empathy is concerned.
Right.
This is a nicer way to do things. Okay. Because I know many people talk about saying keep yourself, as you mentioned earlier, keep yourself in the customer's shoes, but that doesn't mean anything. Actually, it's a very abstract statement. So that is good tool. Are there any other tools?
Like we usually will club it with a user journey. A user journey map is where you also experience every touch point that a user has to experience. For example, what is the experience if an airline company wants to understand what is the experience of my customer right from the time they book the tickets or right from the time they plan to travel to some place till the time they reach their end destination, what is the kind of experience they have and what are all the touch points where they have friction. This is a visual tool called user journey map where you try to kind of capture all sorts of data points, all sorts of touch points, and this has to be done at a greater detail. You can't do it at 25,000 feet saying I bought a ticket, I boarded the flight, I got down at the destination. That's a 25,000 feet way of looking at a user journey versus having a 25 or 30 touch points within that whole journey is a more detailed and intense way of understanding the user journey.
Yeah. For example, in this case, even boarding the plane
Right.
could be one of the touch
Exam,
points,
yeah.
right?
Like boarding the plane, you stand in the line, then there's a priority check, then you are waiting for your turn, then how the your ticket gets scanned, what kind of questions get asked. Again, you're going and standing in line to get into the plane. Once you get into the flight, how easy is it to find your seat? How easy is it to load your luggage? How easy is it to sit and get what you want? How easy is it to consume the instruction? How much time you actually spend, waiting for the flight to take off? What happens in between that? What is your, what is the ambience like? What is the temperature like? So a lot of things can be, become a friction. So by understanding friction is where your next big feature lies. For a lot of the product companies, what we say is work on the friction areas, not on the touch points which are already working well. Don't try to over engineer what's already working well. Focus on the friction areas, and the high friction areas are the ones which has to be priority. And those actually become your product backlog or roadmap items at the end of the day. So that's a visual way of looking at what should be the next problem I need to solve. And user journey map is a great visual tool to understand and get answers to that question.
Are empathy and user experience two sides of a coin, or how they're connected?
Well, it's the same thing, right? User experience, actually empathy is a subset of user experience because the user experience is the whole package, and you need to empathize in order to create better user experiences. Service design is an example where you try to create the whole banking experience, which is it's not just the software touch point, it is also your experience of using the ATM or using the machine which kind of does your checkbook disposal or your passbook updates, or it could be your experience talking to a person at the bank. So all this is a wholesome package, and that's the user experience part. And empathy comes as a subset.
Okay. So now, after the empathy, the next step of the design thinking process is define. Okay. So tell us more about that.
Well, that's where most of the I've seen people struggle with, because defining the problem is the bigger problem. Because we are so attached to solutions that we identify the solution and then we retrofit the problem. And coming up with a problem statement is what I've seen is generally very difficult, because you have to have two aspects to it. One is qualitative, understanding what is the real problem, and quantitative, Well, let's say you've done a good job of qualitative by empathizing and identifying what's the real problem. Quantitative, we may fail because organizations usually lack great data strategy, or they don't have data points or data logs to tell you that this is a real problem. So quantifying the problem is very important, because until unless you don't quantify something, you cannot manage it. If you can't manage something, you cannot really bring out the right outcomes. So I keep telling my students, especially the product managers, that if you can't quantify the problem, then it's not a good problem. You need to have some sort of numbers. You need to have into the problem statement, and defining the problem statement is also very tough, because then you need to go back and figure out. Let me give you an example of, let's say, the lead times are high. Like, let's say, to process an order, it takes X number of minutes. Or, to resolve a customer complaint, it takes about 25-30 minutes. Now, you really want to be sure whether it's 30 minutes or is it 15 minutes. So you need to look back at historical data of, let's say, 1 or 2 years to figure out what is the trend like. So that's where a lot of the teams struggle, because they don't have the right data, and they don't have good quality data or sufficient data to kind of decipher that. And then to extrapolate and say we need to bring it down from, say, 30 minutes to 15 minutes, how do you do that? You need to have some basis, and you need many more data points to get to that spot. So there's a lot of struggle that happens to arrive at a problem statement, and sometimes we end up doing just an okay job with the problem statement. So until there is no sure shot numbers, um, and you can't quantify a problem statement, it's not a good problem statement.
Any techniques or any kind of a way or approach to really that will help people to understand the problem better?
Well, actually, yes. So baselining is very important. So understanding the baseline means looking at historical data, understanding what kind of tables to look at, what kind of column names, what each of it means. You need to get into the database, figure out what tables exist, what data exists, and then having to synthesize the data to make it usable for this particular research work is very important. So a lot of the times, people don't know where the data lies. A lot of the times, people are not sure if the data is right. So having to have a good data strategy, having to have a good person who understands the database is very important. So, getting your basics right around data is so important. If you want to be a data driven, a product driven company, you need to have good quality data. And you should have the bandwidth and patience to build newer data points if needed. Because there are multiple touch points with the customer experiences, but if you're not capturing the data, then it's difficult to do justice to the problem. So I would say have a good data strategy, and be intentional about data and the power of data.
Okay. Now the third stage, ideate. Okay. How does ideate work, and what role does it play in the entire process?
Ideate is very important because when you're working in teams, you have multiple stakeholders having multiple opinions, and people, because they come from different backgrounds like sales, marketing, or technology, or it could be any other departments. They have their own bias and they have their own experiences, and everybody could suggest a solution in a different way. So in the ideate phase is where you get a chance to brainstorm, collect all the ideas. But as a product centric or user centric person, you need to know how to prioritize these ideas. So we used a classic 2 by 2 quadrant kind of a technique where we kind of look at high impact, low impact, high effort, low effort, kind of a matrix, and then kind of add these different solutions on this quadrant. And basically we look at generally we look at high impact and low effort kind of solutions as a ready-made or a sure shot way to approach as the high priority idea to work with. Because when you have too many ideas, you need to prioritize, and this 2 by 2 or a quadrant approach is a very easy and fast way to arrive at that. And there are multiple other ways to prioritize. There are dot voting. There are multiple ways to arrive at consensus on which is the priority problem. But this 2 by 2 matrix is something I found very easy.
Yeah. So in the solution ideation phase, there could be multiple things, other things also involved. For example, feasibility part.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Other than prioritization, feasibility will also come into picture. Okay, so is this always about tech feasibility, or there could be other feasibility aspects also?
No, there are multiple aspects. One is tech feasibility. It always starts with the business feasibility because you're explaining that to tech. Before tech consumes it, there has to be a really good solid use case from a functional standpoint or a business standpoint as a business problem. And while you're explaining to tech, tech then has to understand this and also talk about technical dependencies and if they can better it through tech. So there's always that around feasibility, viability, and desirability. These are the three different circles within which you need to play and understand the problem. And then you have classic prioritization techniques like your rice prioritization or Moscow method. Rice prioritization is more methodical, which has a reach impact. Yeah, it has so basically it's reach and impact, and it uses numbers to basically arrive at a methodical way of prioritizing. Moscow is more simple, widely used because it's a slightly a lazier way of doing things because it doesn't need so many data points. So it has a lot of expert and gut feel to it. So Moscow comes from having previous experience on doing this. So as experts, you will say, oh, okay, this is going to be it's a must have, should have, and then you in a way kind of validate it with the customers. So it gives you that much extra confidence. But sometimes the challenging part is customer also does not know if this must be a priority. So that's when things can get a little tricky. So having to play with Moscow and rice prioritization is two good ways to prioritize. The ideas. When we talk about ideation, firstly understanding which idea to prioritize and work on needs prioritization. It needs brainstorming. It needs trying to kind of reduce the number of options. So all this is a classic facilitation technique, and any person managing ideation must be a good facilitator. That way, they are able to maintain peace in the room and still be able to cater to everybody's needs.
So another problem which I see and I've heard in many conversations is that sometimes the businesses start the solutioning thinking about, okay, this should be an AI driven solution rather than it's a problem solving solution, right? So if you are into that situation in a meeting, how do you handle that?
Well, like even in meetings or when I talk to my students, I always tell them don't slap technology just for the heck of it. Because before technology comes, understanding what problems are you solving. And generally, organizations do that mistake because they are also under tremendous pressure to start innovating. So there's a huge rush and push to kind of build AI solutions. Like, hey, we need to build Gen AI solutions. We need at least 3 or 4 solutions every month. So there's a natural pressure coming from top down to show innovation, to show Gen AI or your AI ability. So that comes naturally, and I think it's part and parcel of doing business. You have to take it with a pinch of salt. So you should be the sane person who is also trying to ask all the hard questions and play the devil's advocate, because it gets so tech driven, so feature happy at one point that you don't really stop to understand who's going to use it, right? And as you know, research also says 80% of the Gen AI solutions are failing or does not do a great job of it. It is all done just because it's trending, and organizations feel they'll be left behind. And for me, as a problem solving person or a person who understands user centricity, I always ask, so what? And you need to ask that at least 5 times so that you feel more grounded about the problem. So I try to bring the human angle and the user angle whenever we talk AI. So that's my way of go to way to kind of cut down too much of excitement and fizz about doing something.
Correct. So let's say now we have done the feasibility study, and investment is kind of approved. Now comes the prototyping phase. Okay, that's the fourth step. So you use the normal UI UX design to get it prototype, or you kind of in design thinking suggests a more demo like approach to prototyping, or it's a normal UI UX.
Well, I would say the more of IT products that I've designed, I rather enjoy more of touch and feel kind of experience. For example, these days I teach students on how to create the mock-ups on a piece of paper and then create multiple versions of that and then actually demo it. And sometimes I even tell them, can you enact it like a skit or a drama, just to show how the user is going to experience it. And that's how designers do it. Designers have so much fun, solving this and doing prototyping. It's really wonderful to just sit and observe how creative they are when it comes to solving problems. And they use simple props, papers and stationery to come out with really magical prototyping. So I think we need to take a leaf out of how the designers do the prototyping. And of course we have AI which can churn out your wireframes in a flash of a second or even in a few minutes. Like Lovable can be a good example of, I was using it the other day. Simple prompting can actually give you wonderful outcomes, right? So that's anyway happening, that's good. But if you want to have a little bit of fun along the way, I think you should start building a more tangible products, touch and feel, like building paper models or building cardboard models out of it, and then really enacting out the scenario is a great way to have fun while doing prototyping.
So prototyping, I mean, if you look at the importance wise, how important is prototyping in terms of the overall process? Okay, so we talked about empathize, define, ideate, and prototyping. How much, if you want to give importance percentage wise?
I would say it comes number. I think it comes at number three. It's after empathizing and defining. Prototyping is good because you have done a lot of thinking, you've done a lot of understanding, but finally you want to see some sort of output. And prototyping is the stage where you finally experience the output, and that's the you know the real truth. So you kind of experience the real truth, and that's when the rubber hits the road, right? So you kind of experience what's whether it really works, doesn't work, or have we understood it enough, or should we like do multiple iterations to get this right. So that's the stage when it all happens. So I would say number three, because you need to firstly understand, then define, and then you should show the output. So number three.
Okay. So now, last stage is testing. Okay. So is it like a normal testing which we are looking at, or there is some difference when we're talking about testing in design thinking process?
Testing is basically getting sincere feedback, like getting feedback from the customer or the users who are going to use the product or solution. And here also, there's a lot of empathy that is needed because we are so excited about our solution that sometimes we tend to discount the user feedback. We may probably not give 100% importance to what the user is saying, like, hey, user knows it, but yeah, but it still works. So there's a lot of empathy still required at the feedback stage, because only when you empathize better with the user and what the user is saying, you will be able to do a better iteration. You'll be able to make a better change. So that also is hard because having to accept a no from the user is also difficult. Getting that rejection also is hard. So accepting the rejection from the user or getting a no from the user is also very painful, and it's not easy. So you need to have a lot of empathy to understand them.
So we talked about all the five stages of the design thinking process. Now, one general question is design thinking applicable to all kinds of scenarios, or there are certain exceptions?
Absolutely, for all kind of situations, wherever humans are involved, definitely you can use design thinking.
And is it going to be different, for example, if you're designing an IT product versus a non IT product? It's going to be differently done.
It's going to be differently done. Like I gave you an example of how you create paper models. For example, imagine having to improve the overall healthcare experience in rural areas. So, how do you talk about sanitation? How do you talk about better hygiene? So, having to create prototypes to explain to your end users and having to collect feedback is a very different and interesting way to do it, because the kind of users you're dealing with are not necessarily IT savvy, don't come with a lot of education, and may have a different bias to what they experience. So every scenario is different, and definitely compared to IT, it's going to be very interesting and takes a lot of unlearning to do to experience and manage the user experiences in those areas.
Okay. Any misconceptions or myths about design thinking?
Well, like design thinking is understood as something like a fast food that you just fix it and just try it out for like a one day, or just get trained and try to apply some of it. If it works, fine, or just execute. Because we're all in an execution mode. Everybody wants to see outputs, and so we don't value the power of pausing and understanding. So design is not understood very well. The design thinking, so it's more like a good to have kind of a thing in business. So that's how that's how most of the feature happy organizations look at.
Yeah. So this is one of the mistakes which organizations make while trying to apply design thinking. Any other mistakes which they do?
Well, design is understood to be more soft, but it also is tactical and technical in nature, because there's a lot of data also gets involved. So if you want to make some really good decisions, data gets involved. So it also has structure. So design thinking is not just about um, being very fancy with words. Design thinking is not just about being flashy. It's not about too many colors or using sticky notes. It's more than that. It has structure, it has method. There's a lot of hard work, and you have to have a lot of patience if you want real good outcomes coming from design thinking. So people don't have the patience and the wherewithal to implement the design thinking process in complete format, I would say.
Okay. So in your experience, applying design thinking to product and services, what kind of a resistance have you faced from the organization, from the people?
Well, empathizing is a time pass. Empathizing is hard, so nobody wants to spend empathizing. It's almost like I understand what the user wants, and we'll go about building it. So nobody wants to stop and experience the magic of what if they are wrong, and what have I understood the user completely. So I think that's something. Those are some of the mistakes, right, which can happen in the design thinking process.
Okay. So, also, are people scared of sometimes telling about what are the pain points? Did you find this in your experience?
Absolutely, it happens. It happens all the time. Looking good happens more often than not. People want to either it's extreme. Sometimes they give out all sorts of problems, and sometimes it's if you have a time constraint, then it becomes a lot more trickier to manage user experience or understanding users better, because then you need to spend more time, so it gets very tricky there. So investment of time is important, and we have seen cases where users don't want to open up because of being scared about something, or not being scared of losing their jobs, or it could be about, hey, if I share too much information, I may be kind of highlighted or put on spot, or so those could be some of the bias that they may have. um, and sometimes I've also seen users overshare, and sometimes it's deviating from the actual experience. So I've experienced both the extremes, where people don't open up as much, and there are people who open up a lot more than that's necessary. So you have all parts of the spectrum covered. So I've experienced that.
And or any resistance from the team itself?
Oh, team also has a resistance because having built the product for a very very long time, now suddenly to believe that most of your features are not used effectively is a big revelation. So having to drop a feature is a very unsaid thing. You want to have more features, you
Yeah,
don't drop features.
correct.
So feature drop is it's like
Taboo.
almost, yeah, it's a taboo. It's a ego thing for a lot of the teams. So, and having to rely on data, engagement of the feature, how effectively is the feature is used. When you start asking all those hard questions is when definitely a lot of resistance is there within the teams.
So just a question comes to my mind. Uh, there's no doubts about that design thinking is very important. And that gives a lot of perspective to how people are feeling. So what can organizations do? Because I know that design thinking is not something which is followed across the board, right? Even though it's so important. So what can organization do to kind of adopt this into their organization in a more structured manner?
Well, Dell did a very good job of bringing in the product model. What they did was set up a product lab. What they also did was give opportunities to developers to think like problem solvers. So, the problem solving is, or the user centricity is not just the responsibility of a consultant or a product manager, but developers also need to get involved in the problem solving process and become problem solvers. Having to understand design thinking by also implementers, that is the development team, testers, or the DevOps team, also makes a big difference in final solution. So where they can come up with great ideas on how this can be done much better. So I think as organizations, one need to invest more in building this product centric approach and a user centric approach. We also had a model where it was mandatory to have a product designer who did a lot of user research. His work was to do user research, understand how the product should be built or how they should experience the product. That was the responsibility of a product designer. A product manager was supposed to manage the roadmap and interact with the customers from a tactical standpoint as to what should be the roadmap items and so on. And the developer is one who's the implementer. So we had three different key roles in a product model. I think it worked like magic. At one point, um, it was doing really wonderful, but to do it at scale is a big challenge for organizations because it needs a lot of money and you won't see immediate returns. So that's something that organizations should look at, especially now when a lot of the repetitive tasks and the basic tasks can be done by AI. And a lot of research also says that when most of the basic tasks can be done by AI, you have a lot of time now to do high value work, which is creative problem solving, critical thinking, which are the skills of the future. And the 2030 study also by shows that critical thinking, creative thinking are the future skills. So we want more problem solvers in the future.
Any case where design thinking did not work?
Design thinking, well, that's a difficult question. um, Coming from somebody who loves design thinking, sometimes when you need to make quick decisions, critical conditions, and emergencies, you need to do what you need to do. So you can't, um, apply design thinking because design thinking takes time. Maybe as an afterthought, you can think about how can we do disaster recovery better. How can we do business as usual better? How can we do failover mechanisms better? So these are certain things you can design. But let's say if something happens immediately as an emergency or need to take quick action, maybe there you need to have a different approach.
Correct. Now, coming to the profession and how people can get skilled in design thinking. Okay, so let's say people who are into product management, people who are business analysts, if they want to really learn about design thinking, how can they learn and where do they start?
Well, there are a lot of YouTube content for sure. And then IDEO does a good job of teaching design thinking. So that's one of the first and the foremost companies we started advocating. So if you go to their websites, you'll find a lot of interesting content. And definitely YouTube channels will help. And picking a problem, any problem that they have, and then having to try it out couple of times kind of gets them into the habit of working in the design thinking ways of doing things, because only when you get started on these different frameworks or templates or techniques. For example, can I use an empathy map canvas? Maybe it is hard the first few times, but then you get used to creating a good empathy map canvas. User journey also is the same. How can I visually represent? Maybe when I do it at the first time, I do it at 10,000 feet. And then as I get better at it, I will probably do a much better job of deciphering multiple friction points, right? So getting into the habit requires first go through YouTube content, visit some popular sites like IDEO to get a better feel and understanding of use cases, read a lot about it, and then start working on a problem that is really worrying you at the moment. It could be a personal problem, it could be a professional problem. Pick the problem and run it through the design thinking 5 steps, and I think you'll get better at it.
But are there any other, because design thinking sounds to be very effective and very important thing. Uh, I don't find too many courses or uh, programs to teach design thinking. What do you think could be the reason for that?
Well, I think it is the need. The need has to arise for people to believe that they have to be problem solvers, and no more they are task masters or just executing tasks. I think gone is the era where you need to take instructions, and all the repetitive tasks will be done by AI. And if you can give instructions to AI, they'll do a better job. Now, what is left for you is doing high quality thinking and the quality thing that you can do in terms of problem solving. I think that people will start realizing that, hey, now I need to identify problems and I need to solve them creatively to create better value. How can I create the next $1 million feature for which I need to spend time understanding user problems? Otherwise, I can't make the money. And that's when, once the important comes in, there will be more enterprises, there will be more avenues where the design thinking will start cropping up. Today, if you have to learn design thinking and get a certificate, there are very few mature training companies which do a good job of teaching you design thinking, where they do teach you um, you know like in a classroom setting, which is the best way to learn design thinking rather than online. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, because it requires a lot of actual scenarios
Actual scenarios, you
in the
need a good
class
expert.
before people can really learn it and
Yes,
experience it.
yes.
Okay, so any advice where let's say people who are into client facing roles, okay, where they can let's say do one or two things quickly to kind of get a feel of what design thinking is.
Well, I think what one should do is apply the so what technique. Like every time somebody is trying to propose a solution or call out a problem, ask so what 5 times. And when you start asking the so what question like multiple times, you will see that you will get to the root cause much faster. And that will keep you more grounded than getting, affected or influenced by the loudest person in the room. So that's a great way to maintain sanity and, have a user centric approach by asking so what. And the other one you can do is asking 5 why. There's a 5 why technique as to why something has to be done a certain way. And when you ask the question why again and again for each of your responses, that's another good way to get to the root cause or problem, and then you can do a better job of user centric approach.
Correct. Correct. Okay. Yeah, that was some concrete ideas. Okay. So before we end, last question. People who listen to this podcast, they would like to know more about it. How can they connect with you?
Well, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. So that's where I'm very active. So they can send me a connection request, drop me a ping. Happy to connect with them and talk more on design thinking. In future, I plan to do some trainings. So hopefully that is also a good opportunity. But I think the best and the quickest way to talk to me or connect with me on LinkedIn is the best way.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time, Prashant.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So this was really the insightful discussion on design thinking. We are planning to do more on design thinking later in the coming months. We'll keep you posted. Thanks for watching this episode. See you in the next episode. Thank you so much.